Hey TCS TV viewers, it's Dave and Evelyn from the camera store, and today we have a hands-on look at the Sigma FP.
Yes, the Sigma FP.
Dave's obviously very excited about this one.
So this is Sigma's very first attempt at a full-frame mirrorless camera featuring a 24 megapixel sensor and the brand new L-mount as part of the L-mount alliance with Leica, Panasonic, and Sigma all kind of working together to make these. Now, this camera touts itself as being a 50-50 camera, 50% stills, 50% cinema. So we decided to do something a little bit differently with this episode.
Yes, and I went completely out of my comfort zone and decided to shoot only video for this review, and Dave decided to stick within the stills side of things.
Yeah, I stayed with my comfort zone of doing stills.
Yeah, so we drove out to the mountains, which isn't too far from where we live, and we decided to capture some good old Canadian fun.
Well, for getting out of your comfort zone, Ev, you did a fantastic job. I mean, you recorded me out of my comfort zone on the ice, obviously.
Yes, I was definitely trying some new techniques and different ways of shooting, and you were trying some new techniques on the ice.
I am Canadian, but I suck at skating.
I wasn't going to say that, but...
I'm okay with it.
But Brendan definitely has a leg up there. And a leg up on me on the video side of things, but we had a lot of fun. And we'll get a little bit more into the video specs and how we made our little video and that sort of thing later. But for now, I think we should talk about some of the things that makes this camera really unique when you first pick it up and look at it.
So the first thing you're going to notice is how small this camera is. I mean, there's point and shoot cameras on the market that are bigger than this.
Yeah.
Now it is a very solid built camera. Now you're going to notice a few things that are definitely missing, like a viewfinder, for instance. We do have a screen on the back, but it's not articulating it anyway. But we do have a heat sink around here as well. So this is to dissipate the heat generated from the video side of things.
Yes. Now, of course, my question right off the bat when we saw that before we got it in our hands is how that heat sink impacted weather sealing. And the fact of the matter is that it's still fully weather sealed, and so you can have water droplets or dust on it. It's not going to affect it. And it's able to do that by having everything sealed behind the heatsink. And this camera doesn't have a fan like the Panasonic S1H, and so it's purely just a way for the heat to escape from the back panel.
When we first got the camera, when you hang on to it, it's very square. Right? There's not a lot of...
Just like Dave.
Yeah, there's not a lot of texture, not a lot of love to this camera to hang on to it. So I was really looking forward to getting the grip, because I'm like, oh good, there's an optional grip for it. And then we got the grip in.
Well, we got one of the grips.
We got one of the grips.
There's two different options that you'll have to kind of get in your hands to really feel it.
So this is the one they call the big grip.
Yes.
Which I would think if I'm a photographer, this is one I'm going to choose right off the bat. I'm not a fan of it at all. Honestly,
yeah.
Ergonomically, I don't really care how it feels. We've had very mixed opinions about it with different people who have tried it. I don't think it really improves the handling of the camera.
No. I would like to try the smaller grip as well, because even just having a little bit of a lip to hold on to for still photography, I think would be valuable. But in my case, for shooting the video side of things, we were pretty much rigging this up. So we put it into a gimbal, we put it into a cage, and so having a camera that's just very rectangular and doesn't have any protrusions to it was really nice in that regard.
But it's a camera that you have to rig up. I mean, unless you have a very specific niche where you need the smallest full-frame camera that shoots great quality video tucked away into a corner somewhere that you can't put a rigging on it, you're going to want to put something on here to use it as a video camera. So you're going to build it up. It's very modular.
Yes, yeah. But it is nice that the hardware for it still is 422 grams of the battery, and that is literally the lightest weight full-frame camera on the market right now.
That is impressive, and it's also impressive because we are going to be floating this on a gimbal, and it's nice to have a little lighter weight unit for that.
Yes, and that was one thing that the guys made me do, of course, is float the gimbal myself. And I've always seen people get very frustrated floating gimbals with different hardware, and I actually found that this was really easy to float because it was so lightweight. We even risked it by putting it on a GoPro boom pole, and it didn't work out that great because this camera doesn't have any in-body image stabilization. It just has electronic, but it was light enough that you could do all kinds of fun stuff with it, and you don't have to worry so much because most devices will be able to handle it.
Yeah, so the size can be an advantage, but it's also a big disadvantage when it comes to handling, I'm finding.
Yes. Another thing that this camera is lacking is actually a mechanical shutter. And so you only have the ability to use the electronic shutter in this camera.
Yeah, you're gonna find you have to contend with rolling shutter on both stills and in video. Take a look at this example here of Brendan doing a slap shot, and you see definite bend in the stick, and that's not because Brendan's an extremely strong guy. It's because we got rolling shutter.
And that's because the sensor doesn't have a very fast scan rate. And so it is definitely something to be aware of if you're considering this camera for both stills and video. Now, one thing that I actually really love about this camera is to do with the minimalist, sort of elegant design that it has.
If you take a look at the top panel here, for instance, you have a very simple power button. You either pick cinema or stills, a record button, a dial for controlling some options, and your shutter button, of course. The back is very simple as well. It's dominated by this really beautiful screen that works fantastic.
Yeah, it's a touch screen, and we found that it was fairly responsive. And the other nice thing is they've kept the menu system similar to Sigma's previous cameras to be sort of like a 3-unit system. Within the menu, there's basically 3 different options. There's shoot, play, and system. And it's nice that there's a different user interface for video and stills. And so the menus are not super deep. It kind of reminds me of the Blackmagic menu system, or from the still photography side of things, it might remind you more of like a Canon system. Definitely not as in-depth as, say, Sony.
Oh, 100%. I found the menu system quite intuitive, and it really didn't take me too long to kind of figure out how it worked.
Now, I didn't mind it too much when I was shooting video, but how did you feel about not having an electronic viewfinder, an optical viewfinder to look through? You only have the screen that doesn't articulate.
So, I like the size of the camera, but not having an electronic viewfinder drove me crazy shooting outside because I have to rely on the rear screen. Now, if I want to get low to the low angle to something or high angle to something, I'm screwed with this because I only have this screen and I have to look at from this. There's a shot I took of this great ice melting on top of this log, but I had to get a really low angle shot. But I had to kind of like guess a little bit because the viewfinder, I have no option. It's like this. Now there is an optical viewfinder.
So we should mention it's a 2.5 times magnification, and this goes over the LCD screen and gives you that view.
It still wouldn't have helped me with that low angle shot, and you need to mount the riser bracket on here as well, which does give you a 3/8 option, which is nice, but I'm not going to use that. And then let's say I wanted to put a flash on here, or not something else, then I got to add something else to this camera over here.
It is a modular system. But yes, you do have to add that accessory. This comes with it though.
It comes with it, and you put that, and you get a hot shoe out of this. That's handy, I guess, but it's something else you have to add on.
Another little thing that we should mention is that I do like how you can actually take off one of the little port flaps, which is very exciting, and it can store inside of the accessory that comes with it for the hot shoe, even though we've already managed to lose ours.
I'm pretty sure we've lost ours already.
We'll find it, I'm sure. But the other flaps don't actually come off, but I think that's okay. We have a 3.5 millimeter microphone jack. We do not have a headphone jack. But we do have an HDMI, a micro HDMI port, as well as a USB-C port. And so both of those are able to have the external recording if you are using a recorder, or you can, of course, record directly to the SD card, which is UHS 2 compatible.
Yeah, and you can actually charge the camera through the USB-C port, which I found quite handy.
Yes. Now, the camera does have to be off in order to do that. So you can't power it through USB-C while you're shooting video, but there is an AC power option with another optional accessory that you can buy.
I'm blown away by that.
I know. It's, well,
something else. Hey, more accessories.
People like buying accessories, I think. Some do.
Leave your comments down below about how much you enjoy buying accessories for cameras. Hey, I want to buy a grip. Hey, let's drop 130 bucks Canadian on this thing, which makes it worse.
Hey. So, autofocus. It's a similar system that we see in Panasonic cameras. It's a DFD contrast detect system. And although it's something that can update as firmware improves, at the moment, we found that the autofocus was not that stellar.
No, if you take a look at the continuous tracking shot against the wall.
It does have face and eye detection.
With face and eye detection, Well, judge for yourself. Now, on the still side of things, I was okay with it. It worked just fine for me. I didn't really have any problems with it that way. But, I wasn't shooting any kind of motion with it. I wanted to use it mainly in single focus, not continuous.
Yeah. Now, I gave up on the autofocus for shooting video in the gimbal rig that I was using. And so I opted to shoot completely manually, which is what Brendan does all the time with our GH5. And so that's something we're very much used to. And it's kind of a reality that a lot of filmmakers have to contend with. But it's definitely not, at this point, going to win any awards for amazing autofocus performance. When we look at the image quality specs on paper, it looks pretty impressive. 12.5 stops of dynamic range, the 24 megapixel sensor. It's a Bayer sensor without the low pass filter. How are you finding the overall image quality?
Well, big part of image quality is the choice of optics, and we went with a small brand new 45mm 2.8 lens. That is fantastic. It's a beautiful lens.
Really nice.
I'm not a big fan of sort of 50mm range lenses. It's not really my range, but I found myself really liking this lens. Optically, it's nice and sharp. Take a look at a couple of these images here, and it is razor sharp for sure. Now, the image quality from the sensor is great. Its base ISO is 100, and we found that you could certainly underexpose it by 3, even 5 stops. We did it a couple times, and bring up some really good details and some nice shadows. Now, it does have a very cool feature on there. If you forget your ND filter,
not naming any names,
and you want to shoot some water maybe in a lake with some cool ice stuff, you have the ability to do expandable ISO, which brings it down to 6 ISO. And I was actually really excited about this because I was able to drop my shutter speed down sufficiently to capture a very cool shot in a spot where I didn't have the proper equipment. The raw files are in a DNG format, so they're very usable in all different kind of programs. Now, I really liked it as a stills camera as far as the image quality goes, even though I hated the ergonomics of it and the functionality of it. How did you find it on the video side of things?
I really enjoyed the experience. I liked being able to rig it up into a gimbal, and I found everything really simple to use. So for someone that's a photographer that wants to get more into filmmaking, I do feel like it's a really good option. And of course, there are some exciting headline features about it that I think a lot of pro videographers are going to be excited about. The biggest one is being able to shoot 12-bit RAW in full HD directly to the memory card. Now, this is uncompressed, unlike the Blackmagic pocket camera. So that means that you're going to have to make sure you use really fast cards. You're going to need a hell of a lot of memory and, of course, processing power to be able to deal with that. Now, at the moment, one of the things that's kind of disappointing is that you're not actually able to play back that raw footage in the camera. That's hopefully something that's going to come out in a future firmware update, but I'm not surprised if they're going to be able to do that. I mean, they've already indicated that they're doing some firmware updates, and it's going to add some really exciting things. One of them is that it's going to have the compressed RAW that can go to an external recorder. So I still think that the Blackmagic pocket camera is going to have a leg up in some ways, but just having that kind of raw video capability I think is really important. And I know you were asking me when we were talking before we shot this, how important is that raw video? And I think it kind of is the same mind frame for still photographers as it is for filmmakers. Is the reason why you need it is because if you're filming something and you don't have a lot of control, you need to be able to have raw when things go wrong.
Yeah, it's the maximum amount of flexibility in post-production.
Yeah, so I mean, in Hollywood, a lot of the time they're shooting ProRes because they have full control over things like their lighting. And if you're someone that's doing more documentary, run and gun, low budget, you don't have control over those things when you're shooting in the outdoors, the great Canadian outdoors. And so that could be an example of why you'd want to have that raw capability.
Yeah, just keep in mind it is a big workflow process. So you've got to really be aware of that.
Yeah, now in terms of workflow, at the moment, you can use DaVinci Resolve. It will recognize those raw files and you're able to edit it like normal video. But if you don't like using that kind of program, then there are some workarounds that you can do. If you want to get into filmmaking, but you have no idea what I'm talking about in terms of raw recording, or you just want to be able to shoot in something you're more familiar with, then you do have the option of shooting in a MOV format and 4K, which will give you the color space 422 8-bit. And that's something that we're used to shooting with, and so it's nice that you can kind of mix and match and you can shoot with whatever you're comfortable in. As far as your frame rate goes, you have maximum of 30 frames per second when you're shooting in 4K, and if you dumb it down to full HD, then you can shoot up to 120 frames per second for shooting some nice slow-mo footage. Although I mentioned earlier that you're not able to play back the raw DNG files on the back of the camera currently, you are able to play them back if you're shooting in the MOV H.264 format. And so that was another reason why we decided to shoot that way in 4K, because of course, being a little bit new to this, I wanted to make sure that I could play back and view my footage as we were filming it in the field.
Now we also get some very cool tools. We have a waveform, we do have histogram, and we do have focus peaking, which is very cool. Now I found interesting, they actually have a black color option, which is interesting. Now what did bother me is that we didn't have an intensity level, so we were only stuck with whatever they gave us as far as the peaking level goes.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I even really thought of, but of course when you have cameras like Panasonic that have the option to adjust that, it is something that you might miss if you're transitioning over to a camera like this. I like that this camera is designed to have kind of more of a cinema feel to it, more professional level. With things like time code, you can adjust your exposure for video using shutter angles. And if that's something that you're not familiar with, you're coming more from a photo side, you can also adjust your exposure for video using the traditional shutter speeds as well. If you're wondering about our record time limit, we definitely didn't hit anywhere near it. We were mostly shooting short little clips, and they are saying that the record limit is 2 hours, which is also happens to be the capacity of the battery. But from that standpoint, I mean, it's kind of bizarre that there is a cap, especially because you can power it through the AC adapter.
Now I wonder if that has to do with the overheating of a sensor or something like that. We have this great heat sink, and a very unique feature on this camera, I haven't seen on any other camera, is you can actually monitor how hot your sensor is.
Yeah, so if it's getting too hot, then you can just end your clip and end it there. But I think overall, it is a very solid video option. I could see a lot of different applications. It's very modular. You can really build it out, expand it, and I enjoyed shooting video with it.
From a stills perspective, I did like the results I got out of this camera. We have a beautiful lens, of course, but the sensor itself performs really quite nicely. Even though I didn't like the grip and I didn't like the accessories and the modularity of it, I got some good results out of it. Now, I would like to see a few new changes. I would like to see backside illuminated buttons, but I did like how the lug nuts for this camera strap were 1/4-20 threads, which are very modular, makes this camera adaptable to all kinds of stuff. One of the 1/4 threads is directly in the center of the lens. If I want to do Instagram stories, this might be something. But I did find this camera was 80% your side, 20% good side, still side.
Well, you know, I definitely agree with you there. Like, I think that the FP is essentially a very good video cinema camera option that can also shoot really nice stills. And that's something that we don't see as often in the camera market right now, sort of in this price point level. A lot of the cameras are great still cameras that also happen to shoot video, and so this is kind of a nice change in that way.
Yeah, most cameras I'm finding are kind of like 50-50, right? This one wants to be 50-50. The switch on it says it's 50-50, but it's really 80-20.
I think Dave's throwing a little trick here. But we want to know, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts on this new camera, the Sigma FP? Do you think it's a good direction for Sigma to go in? Does it have some good potential? What are you hoping to see that they're going to do next? Let us know by commenting below.
Make sure you follow us on Instagram.
And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit that notification bell so we can catch you again very soon.